On this episode of Ask Christian Counseling Associates, join us for a compassionate discussion with Nicole Coleman-Hammett, licensed social worker with CCA, as she shares her expertise on preventing child sexual abuse. We explore practical steps for keeping children safe, responding with wisdom and care when abuse is revealed, and how faith and community support can bring hope and healing in the aftermath of trauma. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you.
It is so good to have you on the podcast. So we're here with Nicole Coleman-Hammett, and licensed social worker with CCA in our Katanning office. So this is actually the first time I think that we've been in person together.
Yes, I just got to meet you in person for the first time.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot, but it's all been online. So this is really great.
It is.
And,
I'm happy to be here.
Let's just start out with, how did you become a counselor? And, what got you to be a Christian counselor here at CCA?
It's probably going to be a long run-on sentence here.
Sure, go for it.
But in terms of counseling, I started at Penn State thinking I was going to run therapeutic daycare centers. Wanted to work with little kids.
That was the dream.
That's what I was going to do. And worked with some at-risk youth. Very quickly learned that toddlers are not my forte. Okay. I'm also by nature a procrastinator, so I procrastinated in where I was going to do my internship for my undergrad. Waited. Finally, there was one last opportunity available, and it was working with victims of crime within the court system. I had always said, because some rough situations within my own family had happened growing up, and I always said I will not work with domestic violence victims. And the one internship that God left sitting on the table for me was working with domestic violence and sexual abuse victims.
Wow.
So I was literally forced into it. Really fell in love with it, though. So that was my internship. And very quickly I realized I'm not supposed to be teaching preschool or doing any of that work. Writing lesson plans wasn't my thing.
So you were initially going in the therapeutic preschool.
Yes.
That was the dream.
I wanted to work with at-risk toddlers.
And saying, I'll never get involved in domestic violence. And you did an internship, and it sort of kicked off this whole thing. Mm-hmm. There's really intense needs that the community has, and counselors fulfill that. Social workers, anybody trained clinically. And so in domestic violence and things like abuse of any kind, some of the most intense things. I remember, I've never done work at a domestic violence center, but my wife did, Renee, and she would tell me stories. The one that seems to stand out to my mind is that the person got dragged down the stairs by her hair, and put in the trunk of a car. And
you would not believe how common that is, being dragged around by the hair for children but especially for domestic violence victims.
And I just never thought of that.
Yeah.
And it became obvious that those were stories that you would hear every day, working in that environment. And, a sector of the community that you do not get to really talk to genuinely, that's where it was happening, and people were talking about their stories. Mm-hmm. And it was intense. It just changes your life to hear those kind of things. So
it does. It impacts every level of the way that I've raised my kids, how I look at people in the grocery store. I think as counselors on any level, there's some degree of vicarious trauma. We hear people's stories. I think especially for someone that does work in advocating for victims of child sex abuse, domestic violence, victims of crime in general. Mm-hmm. It's endless story after endless story, and it's hard not to become numb to that. I were talking about that before this. It's like I never want to come across to a victim that this is normal, because that experience is so not normal, so not okay. But the prevalence of it is so big that people that work in this field, we hear it so often that we run the risk of it becoming normalized in our minds. I never want to be the counselor that isn't hit by the severity of the situation. I think that's something I try to work on.
You can't shut yourself off to it.
Yeah, exactly.
You really have to connect with that with empathy, and that means you're feeling something of what the person, I mean, you can never truly understand,
No.
What somebody's been through. Everybody's situation is different, but that is the key, is to get a feel for that. And it's terrible. Just what you can sort of glean from that. And then you have to imagine, what the full picture is like.
Right.
And it's unimaginable.
I think it's amazing when people do trust us with their stories, especially, I mean, we talked mostly in preparation for this about talking about kids. When a child who is so afraid and really has no power in this world, when they trust you, especially a teenager, when they actually trust you enough with their story and rely upon you to help give them a voice, that's the best you're going to get out of this work, And I think anything that we do on a daily basis, when people are trusting us with the messy parts of their life, I mean, that's what I love the most, is because it's like, how am I so privileged for them to give me that honor? Because who am I to them, Yeah,
winning the trust of a child who you can help, that's huge. And so we're going to go into that. We're going to talk about a sensitive topic of preventing sexual abuse, especially with children, the most vulnerable. So as part of your work in the domestic violence centers, you've been in contact with this. But you also mentioned, I don't know if this was off camera, you just sort of alluded to it, that there's personal things that get you into this too. Share some of that.
So like I said, I mean, I feel like the one thing I always said I would not do was work with domestic violence victims because it hit close to home. I was 4 or 5 when my parents divorced. A huge reason for that was domestic violence in the home. I recall very little of it. I've always tried to show my father as much grace as possible. He has passed away. But in my mind, it was always show him enough grace, because someone told me once, I was a teenager, he only loved in the capacity that he was able to. He didn't know, no one ever did for him what I set out to do for every one of my clients. And that is just to be heard, like just give them a voice. And he didn't have one. He grew up in a horrifically troubled home. He didn't specify or share his story very much, but So
you don't know a lot about your father's background?
Through other family members, I do. And the best that we can tell is that he also was a victim of sexual abuse to a disgusting and horrific degree. And I think that colored his view of the world and how he engaged with people, and eventually just that torment. I'm not giving him an excuse. I think we can have reasons why people do things, but it doesn't give them an excuse. But that's kind of how I showed him grace just throughout my life. He didn't know what he was doing, doesn't make what happened okay. But that was initially when I went into, thinking I was going to graduate from Penn State and go work with children and not domestic violence victims. That was ultimately, I think, where God pushed me, was here's this internship. This is what you're going to do. And I fell in love with it.
So your father was abusive to your mother.
Yes.
And that led to their separation early on.
Yeah. I was only 4 or 5. My sister was much older, and there's a big age gap between the two of us. So she witnessed a lot more. It was actually her now husband. At that time, they were in high school and dating. I always viewed who is now my brother-in-law more as a father figure to me, and he's still in my life. And, I think there's always people that, like I said, make us feel heard. That was my person, I got my needs met, and I think that's the most important part of everybody's story, is where are you getting your needs met, and how can I help you do that?
So you had a father figure in your life. It wasn't your father.
Correct.
And your father's passed away now. Can I ask, is that connected to all of this, him passing away, or is that just something unrelated?
So like I said, I think like the level of torment that he experienced in his own childhood, I mean, his mother was married 7 or 8 times.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, just I can't imagine the number of people in and out of his life. It just, it created someone who was very broken that never got the help, especially in that generation. He didn't grow up in a time when boys would speak up about sexual abuse. He didn't grow up in a time when, that was still don't air your dirty laundry everywhere. So he never aired the family's dirty laundry. He just acted out instead in a number of ways. That led ultimately, I think, to some drug addictions, substance abuse disorders, that created a not very healthy person. We actually don't know exactly how he passed away. I hadn't spoken to him in a number of years, and he was found dead, and it was past the point of being able to really identify how that happened. So yeah, that was...
Well, I'm sorry to hear
He had
of that, but you know, we often talk about the statistic here, and then that is, you know, a child growing up in a household where their parents stay together, and that you have parental supervision, and you know, just mentioning like what your father lived through, like he's doing without those two factors. The third one is that household highly values education, learning from not only...
He never graduated high school either. So yeah, he lacked all of it.
So when you see, you can look at those three factors, and it's very correlated to how you're going to line up with very negative factors. And you know, in this situation, you can clearly see that. It's sad.
It's hard as a counselor, I think, because we know that statistically, even if a marriage is not fantastic, staying married, statistically speaking, produces children who become healthier, more well-rounded, more successful, and less likely also to be victims of sexual abuse and even adult rape.
Yeah.
It's an amazing, some of these studies are amazing.
There's all kinds of studies out there like that, but the common sense part of this is, you know, what you're modeling there is the ability to get along with anybody,
right?
Especially this person, like, you know, the ability to make a decision that you're going to do that. And it's very tough in this culture, you know, for the past 75 years, that seems realistic.
Right.
But the moment that I say, wow, I can't do that, how many other situations do you get into where you have to make that decision?
Right.
You know, one big one is where you work. You know, and to think about just the example of organizations. If people can get along and work together, any organization is going to be off the charts successful. You know, but like what we're plagued with is, you know, that's really tough to achieve. People don't believe it can be done. And in marriage, you learn to do that.
Right. I mean, I think when there's a commitment to stay within that marriage and work for that, like I said, it's difficult in a situation of domestic violence or sexual abuse, because especially like within our churches, obviously we promote working it out, staying married, but then also I think there's opportunity for, you know, clergy, especially when particularly female victims of domestic violence come to their pastor and disclose things. I think that jumping so quickly to work this out before giving that victim the full scope of a voice and being able to report, and especially being able to report criminally if that's needed.
And sure,
you know, it really, we kind of contradict our, you know,
the disclosure,
contradict ourselves a little.
The disclosure I have to give right now is that we do not promote domestic violence, even though, you know, we will always seek to reconcile married people, and it is unethical for us to counsel for divorce. At CCA, we will not do that.
Right.
However, you know, in cases where there's domestic violence, at least in Pennsylvania, it's a rule that if somebody is touched in an assault and that is reported, the police should come and arrest the perpetrator.
We would love to think that always happens.
It doesn't. It's, you know, with any law, it all depends on who's applying that law.
Yeah.
We advocate for that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those can be really beneficial interventions. And
so, you know, I would say just it's a means to an end. Like with that one thing, if every time, you know, may it never be like, but say I did physically abuse somebody, if I was arrested and charged every time, it would stop eventually. And the fact is that when it's not held accountable,
right,
it can become insanely damaging.
And that's what I hear the most frequently from child victims, you know, wives, husbands, all types of couples that look all kinds of ways, more often than I want this person punished to the full extent of the law, I hear, I want them to be okay. I want them to get help. The amount of empathy in the hearts of most victims is far greater than we can understand as the people who aren't sitting where they're sitting. Because when we're looking at it from the outside, especially when I do work in the court systems, it's easy to sit back and say, just punish them and put them away forever. But then I have the victim sitting beside me crying because he's being taken to jail and she loves him. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around, how do you still love this person this much?
Right. And, not that I've worked in that environment, but in any counseling organization, including CCA, many people come reporting domestic violence. And I have experienced, this syndrome, label it what you will, where the victim is defending the perpetrator.
Absolutely.
That we want the person to be held accountable. We want to separate the couple for safety. We're willing to give explicit instructions. And here's the one thing is that, people might disagree with me. Most people don't need advice. That's not the issue. It is the emotional attachments that I have that keep me in a dangerous proximity to a bad situation.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned safety, because that is, I just think first and foremost, securing someone's safety and being able to know when to, stop the presses, everybody stop everything, and just address safety first. I think most victims and a lot of perpetrators will also at least stop what they're doing and address some initial safety if there's enough cooling off time. To have a plan for that.
So, very clearly, we advocate that perpetrators are held accountable every time.
Yes.
And, and often we're getting disagreement with that from somebody. Right. And we would advocate for that in the church and in the community and with police officers. And judges.
There's a lot of gray area. It gets very political. It gets very messy. But like you kind of alluded to, all of these people involved are the best experts of their own lives. And it's not going to look exactly like we may imagine it. So I think deferring to what they need for safety and what their goals are is so important. We mentioned a lot of domestic violence stuff. I think where that plays into the child abuse and child sexual abuse in particular is homes with any kind of violence already create a greater risk factor for those children to be also being victimized.
Right. So there's this complicated thing. We'll advocate for that, and when we can't get that, we will advocate. At the same time, if we can get both, but if we can't get that, we'll also advocate for safety and do everything that we can. And oftentimes we talk about this factor that, a Christian counselor, ethically, according to our code of ethics, cannot get involved in a divorce or does not give advice towards that or any direction. And the first thing that a lot of times the public will come back and say, well, do you condone violence? Well, of course not. No. But divorce is not the ultimate solution to this problem. It is accountability and safety. And divorce does not factor into that. So you still, if you're going to make that move, you still have to figure this out. And that is very controversial for me to say. I know, folks, when I say that.
It pulls me in so many directions because, like I said, I work in the court system and see one side of those things, but then, as a Christian, I feel another. Ultimately, I think simply our non-judgment of what any victim may ultimately decide, and still reassuring any victim, we're here, we want to help keep you safe. Your choices are your choices, and while it may not be something we can agree with, for me, the easy out is always, well, the best place for advice on divorce is an attorney. If that's the path you're going and you are...
Ask an attorney because that's their business.
Right. Enacting your own free will, then talk to an attorney about that.
And this is all unrelated things, but anytime we're in marriage counseling and the couple's considering divorce, and there's been horrendous situations. And to be fair to the folks listening out there who've been, in marriage counseling with CCA, sometimes I'm across from the counselors, and Renee, forgive me for saying this, but, I have to think like, wow, they have it together more than I do.
Oh, I think it all the time.
And so we do take a humble approach to this. We just want to help, and there's also, for 10 years I did custody evaluations. So I wasn't in the office, but we would get people who were going through that office then. And custody evaluations are set up to choose a parent of choice. We'd say the POC. And the courts would insist that somebody is chosen. So scientifically, psychologically, you had a way to measure that. Mm-hmm. And you had to evaluate all of the family members to qualify it. Mm-hmm. That's what we did. And we were also very clear on what the research was saying, which is, if these two parents and I want people to imagine we only got the worst of the worst cases. And I know that Nicole in what she's talking about today is she's involved in the most extreme things. The research was saying if those two parents can have any way of being involved with the child, especially in factors of working it out or like however close you can come to that, the success of the kid is raising.
The court still takes that approach to a large degree. It takes substantial risk of harm for the court to at least initially approach custody with anything other than, we're coming at this hoping for 50-50 everything because there's two parents, take this as a team approach. In a perfect world, that would work all the time. But obviously you've seen
you really
how custody goes. It's not a perfect world.
Yeah, so some jaws might be dropping right now, but the research is very clear, which means it's been replicated over and over again, and it just to me makes it clear, like if we as adults can work it out, there's that should be the first responsibility, because there's these vulnerable kids who, they don't even get a chance. They just depend on these two people.
And that's the biggest act of prevention that parents can do. Like, I see all the time, okay, yeah, these two parents, you probably hate each other, but there is a child involved, there's risk involved. If for no other reason, please find some way to reduce the long-term risk to this child and co-parent. I mean, co-parenting is really, really hard. I mean, it's hard for married people to co-parent, two people that couldn't find a way to work it out.
And we provide co-parenting here too. So we know the challenges, but I would also, the gift is, when you have kids, it automatically challenges you to change all of your life priorities because you have to. Mm-hmm. And it's been a gift, but I think back to the time where I didn't have children, and, I got married young, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I had to put every selfish desire aside. And when you're seeing clearly, you're prepared to do it. It's like a snap of a finger. Now, if there's something where you're stuck in your life, that doesn't happen. And you don't experience that maybe. And that's one of the reasons you should get the counseling immediately and get trusted people around you. Mm-hmm. So Nicole, you see the consequences of people being stuck, parents, all of the time. But let me ask you, you work closely with families and children impacted by abuse, and so we're alluding to that. Share about that part of it, the kids, and there's physical abuse, also there's sexual abuse. And, this is, you tell us about that. And especially we're going to focus today on like when somebody shares that somebody is being abused, what the question is, what do we do?
It is, I think the most important thing for me to say right off the bat is this is something that I work with so frequently. So I see it so often, it consumes so much of my life that if even for a second I come across as being callous to this, I'm not,
Right.
The problem is so big. When kids disclose and it is unbelievable, the number of kids, whether it's happening in the home, at school, at church, on the volleyball team, whatever, the number of kids that are being perpetrated against is mind-blowing.
What's the statistics?
So roughly 1 in 4 girls, by the time they turn 18, will report that they have had some instance of sexual violence, attempted rape, or sexual abuse. 1 in 7 boys would say the same.
That is a lot. So we're talking 25% of girls.
Yes.
And a high percentage of boys
Yes.
too.
Yeah. And I think where it gets sticky is
before the age of 18.
Yes. By the time they're 18, 1 in 4 girls would report that either a completed or attempted act of sexual violence or abuse has occurred to them. And what's scary is for those that has occurred, the sexual abuse victims, boy or girl, are so much more likely to further be victimized as adults. And I think there's a number of behaviors and patterns and thinking involved in that. I would never victim blame nothing that anyone does. I mean, no act of violence upon a person is that person's fault. It's the perpetrator that chose to do something bad. But it's interesting the patterns of behavior and thinking that occur in victims, child victims especially, that the statistics, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the statistics are mind-blowing that when those girls reach college age, how much more likely they are to be a victim of rape in college.
Wow.
And
excuse me, I'm like, I have allergies today. I can hardly talk, so I apologize. There's this concept of grooming, and people are groomed to be victims, and so describe that, because it almost goes beyond reason. Like, this horrible event happens, and then you see it recur, but it is through this grooming that it's like a perverse type of training that goes on, and it seems like
and people
other
don't
perpetrators
recognize it as perverse because it appears that this is someone that loves the child. They're just spending a lot of time with them. They're buying them presents. They've shown a special interest in the child. And this can be a family member or, like I said, coach, church leader. I won't come down hard on church leaders. I know that that's a whole other can of worms to have that whole conversation.
Well, it's widely known, and I sort of, sometimes I look at schools and they're, in today's world, like, how do you keep people safe? Yeah, but most of the attention goes along to keeping strangers away.
Right.
With this, it's reversed. It's not the strangers; it's the people that you know.
Greater than 2/3 of child sexual abuse victims are being assaulted by someone very close to them that is very trusted. Those grooming behaviors occur, and they happen for a reason in the eyes of the perpetrator, because it establishes a bond. It establishes trust. It's, you're my special person. I love you. I only do these things for you. And then it's, I only do these things with you or to you. Sometimes the grooming process is months and months, if not years. And perpetrators, and this is why I kind of mentioned, the leaders in schools or, the volleyball coach or a church leader. It's not that a Boy Scout leader or a priest is more likely to perpetrate against a child. It's that perpetrators are more likely to put themselves in positions of opportunity, and there's victims to be had in the Boy Scout troop, You might not be prepared with these types of statistics, but in the last 30 years, people are really like, oh my gosh, the Catholic Church, these. I thought I was seeing statistics that just as many people are sexually abused in other institutions, but they get no attention. Yes.
And when you're looking at statistics this large, 25% of all girls and 1 in 7 boys, it's a huge amount of people. And
there's studies that say, okay, of child victims who are victimized by a church leader, were they more likely to be victimized by a priest versus a pastor? And it's like, at that point, we're missing the point. It's the point is perpetrators act on opportunity. They spend time grooming, and there is room for prevention there.
Yeah, and let's just pause right here and say, we study why people, why life becomes unmanageable in your mind and your heart, and there is nothing else that crossing a sexual boundary with a kid, there's nothing else that could do damage like that does. Yep. And if we could just eliminate that, the world would be a hugely better place.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, that's so true. I mean, if every counselor, every therapist, every doctor, every church leader could understand that and how big that could change our whole world.
Yeah.
You're not just doing that to a child when they're victimized. It's everything that happens after. It's who they become as an adult. I mentioned my father. Had someone given him a voice, or had his mother just not been abusive in the first place, my whole life would look different. My whole family. I mean, everything. And I look at some of the amazing talents that he had. He was really genius smart when it came to like mechanics and cars, and I mean, really wildly intelligent with certain things. And it's all the wasted gifts that just kind of fall to the wayside for child victims that we do not give a voice to. And I think that's why I love what I do. There's so much inspiration in working with these kids and seeing the amazing things that can happen when they are supported.
Yeah. So there's just a lot there to cultivating a kind of environment that can support these kinds of boundaries. And we live, unfortunately, in a culture where every sexual boundary is being promoted to be crossed. And I would just also want to raise that. I don't want to get into controversial topics today. However, in that kind of environment, and I think that there are very great studies out there that are unfortunately not going to be able to be done anymore, like Regnerus, who was just showing that these traditional boundaries, when we rework them, we're sending a message to the culture, hey, these boundaries, they don't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And so there's that element in this culture, and that can really change. Like we can cultivate a kind of environment. So let's talk about the common risk factors in a child's environment. Like how can we spot that?
So I think what we've touched on a little is the biggest risk factor is the grooming process and the protective parent or protective guardian, and it's never their fault, but perhaps missing the cues of who is your child spending the greatest amount of time with. You may not identify that person as, we hear these stories of, oh gosh, it was the coach. And everyone's like, no, it's not the people you suspect. That's the number of times that I hear, I never ever would have thought it would have been Uncle so-and-so. Like, we love him. It's one of the biggest ways to prevent and also to address a risk factor is our blindness to where are the biggest risk factors. And it's so sad to have to be looking at our own families. I'm not saying everybody's family has a sexual predator in it. Right. Statistically, that's probably true. But I think the risk factors, aside from the obvious.
It's so tough, though, because so there's rules that I try to keep, and there's these standards, especially when you're working with kids. So I've worked with kids all my career. I specialize in student ministry. So, I'm a counselor here at CCA, but I've always volunteered in the church, and at times that we've been on staff at the church, to do that. So the rule is you never go with a kid anywhere by yourself. There's always another.
It's common sense,
persons.
really. Yeah.
So you go in threes.
Yeah.
And I'm like really just cautious. Like, there's like bathrooms. I won't ever talk to somebody in the bathroom, and if I know that there's like a group of kids in there, I'll wait.
Right.
Just to be clear, like adults should not be gravitating towards that.
Exactly.
Or engaging you.
Well, and it just promotes a culture of safety for the kids. Anything we can do to make a child feel safe. We no longer live in a world where children are better seen than heard. Has to be the rule. We want to hear them. We want them to have a voice. But.
So there's this, we'll get into questions more later, I guess, but the thinking that I would say is that adults should be making that clear. Like I am a safe person. Here is me being safe, and the other adults should be able to see that, and the kids. So you're training people to stay in an environment that's safe. But then you get into this thing. I remember way back in my master's program, one of the instructors were saying, like kids need to be hugged. They need physical touch. And we live in a culture, say like, look, I don't want anybody getting the wrong idea. And so it becomes, how do we avoid that sterile environment?
There's some really great like outreach and prevention programs that most of the local domestic violence and sexual assault centers will offer to, whether it's a youth group, the church itself, schools, whatever. But it's fallen out of practice so much now, but it was called Good Touch, Bad Touch. And it was like the hot program when in the early 2000s. But the fundamental message there is ask questions to help kids create the rules for their body and what makes them feel safe.
Yeah.
Don't shroud a child's body or like naturally developing sexuality. Don't shroud it with this big sense of mystery and, we don't talk about that, because the more we say don't talk about that, the less likely that child's going to be to come to you and say something bad happened.
Yeah. So you would create procedures. And if I remember correctly, that program was about, what's a good touch, what's a bad touch.
Like you mentioned the hugs. Like, hey, I like a hug from this person, but not from that person so much.
Right. And so it would begin to identify comfortable, uncomfortable. And then it would say like, well, think of yourself as wearing a bathing suit. And, touches, outside the bathing suit area is okay. Touching where you have the bathing suit is not okay.
And that changes with a kid's age, too. I mean, there's 3 or 4-year-olds, they're fine running around naked all day long, and it doesn't enter their mind. Yeah. And then we have parents that hear some of this information, and suddenly it kind of spirals or snowballs because my kid's okay being naked all the time. Are they being abused? And it's no. I mean, we had to take things in context of what their natural development is.
Yeah. So we can get paranoid too, and we have to resist that. So it is a balance, in an environment. And I love to talk about the days when I was a kid because I don't know if this sounds right, but I think when I was like 8 or 9, I could take my bike, leave my house, go wherever.
You can't do that.
And
now,
I remember
like
I lived in Whitehall as a kid, and we would ride our bikes to South Park, which was like 5-6 miles away. No cell phones, nothing, and nobody would ask any questions. If you did that now as a parent, if you let that happen, you would be investigated.
Oh my gosh, yeah. 100%.
And so just the times have changed. I think, we're all a little bit paranoid because of how much danger has increased.
I think too, like, I don't know, I mean, and we may disagree on this, but I don't know that the danger has increased. I think because of the number of ways that we have access to media, we're so much more aware of it. I think the danger was always there, It'd be
interesting for the statistics. Yeah, for me, it is that there is less community and people are more isolated because of good things like technology. And so, this community thing where everybody was watching in a good way, which means if I was misbehaving, everybody on the street knew it versus,
It's funny that boys always say that. You don't hear girls saying the neighbor always had to tell my mom. It's always the boys.
Well, it is true. Like, the boys and girls, get in trouble in different rates. But I think that's gone though. Like, it's just, people stay inside. You don't know your neighbors. Family networks have broken down because the divorce rate is higher and the people who are not getting married until a later date of age. So all these factors, but I think there is a debate there. That would be.
I think where you're completely correct is it's almost like we can't get ahead of enough information or what's going to happen next in terms of technology and how technology is used to victimize children. I mean, we have laws that say if you post a nude photo without consent of any child or anyone period without consent, technically that can be charged because you're publishing, pornography. It doesn't matter, really the content of the picture, just any kind of nude photo. We have laws that say, oh yeah, that's bad, but we haven't found good ways to like actually enact that whole process and, like you said, be accountable, make that punishable. I have a number of teen clients that routinely people are posting images of each other. I mean, it's not just the sending of the nudes and that getting passed around school, which is criminal and bad enough in and of itself.
Yeah.
But even with, we've already seen it with AI, people putting a child's face on a different body.
Yeah. I was about to say that.
It's amazing. It's just like the laws can't keep up with it. So yeah, there's so much risk there because we can't keep up.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to mention, that because I see these images on social media where the kid's face is covered up by a heart.
Right.
And I'm like, why are you even putting the kid up there if you can't see the face? But that's, I've never heard, I really never heard of these things. And I was out of like the school environment when people were posting things even. So just
I didn't grow up with social media. Like it takes a minute to even absorb, wow, what are these kids dealing with and living with every day, knowing their pictures everywhere, sometimes without their consent. Everything you do is recorded. It's not the neighbor next door telling your mom. It's like cameras everywhere.
Yeah. So like as an adult, if I wasn't a counselor, I could be completely out of touch and not care about that stuff. Personally, if there's some kind of fake image out there, my part is like, we shouldn't even be looking at the images anyway. Who cares, But again, I don't know enough about what people are doing with them.
It's so impactful to some of these, like I said, especially teens. I mean, regardless of how the image was created, if it even bears the likeness of that person, that can ruin their childhoods, And we treat teens so much like they're just little mini adults, and it's like, no, they're not, and that pain is real. That
is not true. Yeah, when images or you get exposed to things, and and to be fair, like I do, I've come into a lot of contact with people who have been bullied online or have been exploited. So a girl who now is a woman and saying somebody posted a nude picture of me. And I knew that everybody saw that and how devastating, and like what people were doing with that.
And the amount of blame that those victims receive. Why'd you send that picture to him in the first place? Okay, well, maybe it's I made a mistake and we broke up and I trusted him and, whatever the case may be.
Right.
Why are we instantly blaming them when someone made the choice to distribute it? That's, and
right.
As a word of caution, you can also be charged for sending the photo in the first place.
And so we've known that they're criminalizing that.
Yes, so let's not send nude photos.
Yeah, well, and here's the other thing that I've seen people be labeled perpetrators, with that, and they're like, I had no idea that.
Oh, it
that
absolutely
was
happens.
In trouble.
It's one of the things that concerns me a lot because there's so many people that are now being placed, and I mean, Megan's Law. It's an important tool. I believe in many ways in the effectiveness of that. But one of the things that we're seeing is, as part of plea deals, people are agreeing to be placed on that list for things that they don't want to go to jail over what happened. But honestly, some of it is, I received a photo, that yes, I opened it, I looked at it. And in some situations, they can be charged. And then in an effort to avoid jail time, they're like, sure, put me on the list. That dilutes the severity and the seriousness that we need to take the people that need to be on that list.
So you see all kinds of things like that happening in working with the families.
Yep.
And that's, if you end up on a list like that, it's your life is destroyed. Mm-hmm. And
in some cases, I'm okay with that. I mean, to be clear to all the victims out there, I'm okay with that for some cases. Maybe not a life destroyed, but some people need to be on the list to protect other children.
Well, it's very hard. Our advice would be steer clear of anything that would get you on any kind of list like that. It's definitely worth your time to think that through before you do something you feel like doing. But I think it comes down to there's these disclosures like I have been abused.
Yes.
And so walk us through that, because this becomes just like I wouldn't have thought of a reason why this could be used at the point of discovering something that, oh my gosh, this is wrong, but I don't know exactly what to do with it. Tell us, walk us through what if something is disclosed to us, what do we do?
So, obviously we talked about the grooming process and some risk factors, which I know I didn't cover many of those, but ultimately the hope is when something is disclosed, and I think who a child discloses abuse to is really important, because it's going to be handled entirely different based upon who that child discloses to. So if this child's already in therapy because, grandma died and they took it really hard, and then they disclose to a therapist or one of our counselors, whoever, those reports are handled so much differently, because mandated reporters obviously have to set forth certain actions and put that in motion.
So who are mandated reporters? Give us the list, and then we'll go back down through the grooming again. Just give us a list of grooming things we should look for.
So if you're a mandated reporter, you should know it. But I think it's really important. There are actually mandated reporters that have no idea that they're a mandated reporter, and it's alarming.
Okay.
But I think it's really important for families to understand who the mandated reporters are in their lives too, because kids don't always want to share with their parents. So then the parent can be encouraging the child. If you have suspicions that something's going on with my kid, then you encourage the relationship with a mandated reporter in the kid's life. And I promise you, your child has multiple mandated reporters in their lives.
Okay.
I think, obviously church leaders, especially, like we mentioned, some of the,
youth ministry people,
yes, bus drivers, anyone in charge of a child at any point, at any level. So the school custodian is a mandated reporter because he or she is employed by the school.
So employees who are involved with children are always going to be mandated reporters.
All church leaders are mandated reporters.
All church leaders.
Even volunteers in the volunteer youth group leader at your church is a mandated reporter, because they are, at least in some, even if it's an hour a week, for that 1 hour, they are in charge of the safety, care, custody, control of your child for that hour. That makes them a mandated reporter by law. I think there's probably some gray area there. I think there's, for a counselor to hear a disclosure of abuse and choose not to make the report to Childline. In Pennsylvania, we have Childline. If we choose not to make a report, we risk our license.
Right, and it could be a misdemeanor offense. We
can be fined. There's a lot of consequence to us.
It's very strict. Reporters have this responsibility. It's mandated by the state. What happens once a report is made? What's that like?
So if a disclosure of abuse is made and a mandated reporter Childlines it, Children and Youth Services, that can be called a number of different things in Pennsylvania, and based on your county, CYS, CYF, there's a lot of different versions of it, but your Child Protective Service Agency has a certain amount of time to look into that report and decide whether or not it needs followed up with. Assuming that it is a credible report and we believe something happened to the kid, they interview any of the people involved. To me, it seems like, and I don't work for law enforcement, I don't work for the district attorney's office, but it seems to me like a lot of times perpetrators or suspected perpetrators are interviewed last. They do a lot of information gathering. And even if something has happened and it doesn't rise to the level of being a criminal activity, CYS can still make recommendations for care of this child. A lot of times it's a kid's too young. The report sounds a little, did you make believe this? Was this real? Kids come up with funny nicknames for people and you can't even identify who they're talking about.
Yeah.
But no report of any type of abuse should go unheard or not followed up with, because there's still services that can be put in place.
Yeah.
Is your church ready to strengthen marriages and transform relationships? Introducing Extraordinary Marriage, a 6-week small group or weekend retreat from Christian Counseling Associates. Whether newlyweds or decades in, couples will discover powerful tools to deepen love, improve communication, and grow together in Christ.
So Nicole, the question that I usually get, like when somebody's been a part of a report, it's not the person, well, it could be, so we have counselors who make the report. They ask me all the time, how long is it going to take for somebody to reach out to the house, or what's going to happen? I think you walked through like pieces of that.
Yeah. Each county looks a little different. There is a relatively short time frame for each county in Pennsylvania for a CYS worker to lay eyes on that child and make sure they're in a safe place. If the possible perpetrator of any abuse is in the home, they may immediately make some arrangements to secure that child's safety, remove either the possible perpetrator or, I don't know if it's unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the situation, sometimes they'll just find a different place for the kid to be in the meantime. It does not mean that people have lost their children forever. It's just sometimes they have to take some emergency action.
You have the situation with adult perpetrators. You also have sibling perpetrators. And so what happens in those kinds of situations? And now we're getting into, there's been situations where, the family member's like, we're not sure we want to make the report.
Right.
And there's a mandated reporter who needs to make that report. What is going to happen in situations like that where it's a kid?
I've seen in a lot of cases they'll place one or the other of the children in family care, kinship care, to keep everybody safe and to eliminate further risk.
Who are the kinship care? Like what is that?
So that is typically, obviously we have very few foster families who are willing to take on situations with a child with problematic sexual behavior. So there's not a lot of options sometimes, especially in a lot of our rural communities. There's just not a lot of options. So
but they'll
kinship
seek out
care,
another family member, say for
another
instance,
family member, or
trusted friend,
neighbor down the street that's willing to, in a pinch, I feel like they'll just try to help coordinate whatever they possibly can.
Yeah.
I wish we had better options and a system. I'm not saying the system is bad fundamentally, but we get in a lot of sticky situations where we can't do the things we would like to do, and we don't see the amount of safety that we would love to secure for these kids. I don't know the answer to that to make it better.
So there are reports that they take longer than you expected, or you hear nothing, and things like that. Because usually, like with us, the experience that I have personally is, there's an unfounded report. The system is not going to get back to us and share anything with us. And then a couple months down the road, we get a letter.
Then you get the letter. Yes. Yeah. Everyone should get a letter in one fashion or another, whether the little boxes at the top are checked founded, unfounded, or indicated. An indication is typically the cases that are also involved in the criminal process. Something can be founded by a CYS worker saying like, yeah, there's enough here that we really think this happened. We really want to make sure that we address this. Like I said earlier, it doesn't rise to the level of criminal activity, but still abusive. Or there's just not enough. The child may not be old enough. There's an exception called the tender years exception in our court system where attorneys, or the district attorney's office mostly, would request that be enacted because the child's too young to successfully testify. So they use other forms of evidence. All of the moving parts for that are really difficult. The younger the child, the less likely things are going to move through the criminal process fully, I think. Because the best witness is a child. If that child's nonverbal, we talked about risk factors, protective factors.
Yeah, and you have those kind of situations. I guess the other kind of situation that I would just frame here is, okay, this report has been made. I disagree with it, and now I'm at the mercy of the court system. And thank you to all the public servants out there, especially the Children's Bureau. There is situations though where a parent is saying this Children's Bureau person is completely outrageous.
Everybody's human. People can get it wrong. People do get it wrong.
So what do I do as a parent to say, like, I just want to make sure that my rights are
Right.
being handled.
I think at the end of the day, protective parents are always going to be protective. And the best answer in any situation, and I think, to demonstrate that you are a genuine protective parent in a situation where if someone were to come to me and say, hey, like, we think your kid's being abused, it's, well, what do we do? What do we have to do next? I think that if a parent is accused of abusing their child or that abuse is happening in their home, obviously, yes, you have rights. But most frequently, those parents are going to say, if something did happen to my kid, I want to know about it. Sure. Like, you just cooperate.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would, we hear all kinds of cases over the years.
Yes.
So we occasionally get cases where it's either a counselor, not one of ours folks, but the counselor is in the wrong or the caseworker. And, so there's been situations where the parents have had to legally defend, because it's not like, did something happen here? It is an outrageous claim
Right.
that's coming. So, like one time parents were like praying over a kid, and the caseworker was saying, you were trying to do an exorcism on the kid. And, to be fair to the caseworker, the parents were more charismatic, in their faith, but the caseworker never had a Christian experience in their life. And, the family was like, this is outrageous. And they were able to defend it.
Right. Yeah.
And there was no claim of abuse from the kid. It was more of like another family member who was in conflict with the parents had made a report.
That happens so often, and it's so unfortunate, especially in custody cases where you have one parent versus another and the constant battle of child line reports.
Yeah.
That's a tool and a system that needs to be used effectively so that we can help protect kids. And I'm not saying that, anytime you suspect anything, absolutely use that system. Yeah. But it's not a weapon, it's a tool.
Right. And anything and everything can be misused in family conflict. So I always like to bring that up, even though, may nobody listening to this ever think like, oh, wow, that happened to me. And to then return back to, okay, what happens once a report is made? You also have this situation where, we've become paranoid and we said, did somebody touch you here? Did somebody, and the more you ask that question, the more you're getting different answers. When a trained professional is going to go through a protocol.
Yes.
And the protocol is age appropriate and is fair. And is very different than you asking leading questions or specific things. And, especially with certain kids, age groups, it's very hard because you can ask a 3-year-old questions and you're going to get a different answer every time. And it's going to be all over the spectrum.
Right.
And, we've witnessed parents go absolutely out of their minds with that.
We have a wonderful system that addresses that. Like, to kind of follow up on what happens once a report is made. The report's made, CYS may be called. There's also situations where a disclosure of abuse is made and then it goes on a different path, but ultimately most of these kids are interviewed, hopefully, at a children's advocacy center. To my knowledge, all of our counties in Western PA are served by one CAC, Children's Advocacy Center, served by one or another of them. There's multiples. But there's a nationwide standard of care that kind of helps to educate and train forensic interviewers. And this looks different by county. So, by no means am I saying this is the end all be all, but generally speaking, there's a standard of care and there's a method of training interviewers that, like you said, they get to an age appropriate method of interviewing these kids. And they're wonderful at their jobs. It comes from a very neutral standpoint. Yeah. Their job is to help keep the kid safe, protect the kid. They typically don't work for law enforcement. They don't work for the DA's office. They don't work for CYS. A lot of them are, freestanding centers where you bring the child and they're interviewed. the results or the outcome of that interview can often lead to the interviewer saying, yeah, I believe that, developmentally speaking, or based on what this disclosure included, even if the child's 4 and also says very clear information of this child knows more than they should know about certain topics, but they told me Donald Duck did it. They'll follow up with, the bigger issue there is this child knows a lot more about things that a 4-year-old shouldn't know about. I don't care if they said it was Donald Duck. We think something happened to this kid.
Yeah. So there's very definable things in an evaluation that you could get. And again, going back to my forensic experience, we were always taught to be very humble. When you don't know something, you don't know. And a lot of times, we were hoping to find something, in this that could be telling to the authorities, and we found nothing. Yeah. Even though, it should be there, and we had to go and say, I didn't find it.
Because our bias and our stereotypes that we buy into, I think, really play into that. Childhood story of my own. I grew up thinking that child abusers were scary old men in white vans. I can remember being told that, there's the scary white van. I don't know where that came from, but then obviously forever, I'm it's the perpetrators are scary old men. And when in fact, the perpetrators can be anyone. And I think that especially those interviewers that do the forensic interviews, they're trained to try to keep that bias out of it and those stereotypes out of it, because a perpetrator and a victim very rarely look exactly as we think they should.
So there's standards and there's expectations, and in these children's advocacy centers,
they are wonderful.
They're gonna. Sometimes they're not going to be able to find something, and maybe people wish they could, but the standards are reasonable to truly investigate that, and we wouldn't suggest that parents investigate that, past trying to detect if something happened and then making a decision to report something.
Yes, and one thing that I will say that I know is true of the vast majority of CACs, of advocacy centers, is that parents can't just call them and request a forensic interview because I think something happened or I know something happened and I want this interview. They take their referrals directly from CYS or law enforcement most times. So you can't just, I don't want to blow up the phones of all the CACs. But that happens on a referral basis. From there, if the interviewer believes that something happened to the child, it's stays as an open investigation with CYS. They see if there's resources or charges that need to be filed. They work hand in hand with law enforcement. Law enforcement then talks with district attorney's offices to see if charges can be filed. All of that process can take a really, really long time, and it's really frustrating for families.
About how long on average?
So the initial interviews and investigation, I think we typically see a couple of months is pretty standard, sometimes more if there's a lot of information to gather. Victims and their families have rights to be informed of what's happening, but also it does not help matters when parents are calling the detectives every 3 days what's happening. I know that it gets frustrating and kind of clogs up the system, and I wish in a perfect world we could fix that whole system. I see that's the biggest frustration for parents of children who have been abused is the length of time. For cases that go to, and I don't want this information to discourage anyone from reporting or moving forward, we're seeing cases right now in some of the counties that I work in that are just now going to trial that were initiated during COVID.
So about, 4 years?
And those are rare cases. Typically, I think about a year. If a case goes the whole way to a trial, there's so many things. People think that it happens like it does on TV. Yeah. You make a report of child sexual abuse, and then the police come and arrest the guy, and then you're sitting in this big courtroom at a trial with a judge. That's not how that happens.
Right. It's the legal part of it is a long
process. And I definitely don't need to sit here and get into all that.
Yeah,
but I'm not an attorney and can't give legal advice.
It's the American system, and it's the way
speedy
that it
trial is one of the funniest statements that we have. I don't know that there is speedy trials. The legal definition of that is very different than what your normal American would define speedy as.
Yeah, so a lot of times we question, is this successful punishment if it's not swift, severe, and certain? And the swift part is always being called into question, especially if you had one of these cases that we're just now getting to from COVID.
And it's so, a year of a child's life is such a huge chunk of time.
Yeah.
So much so that it's not uncommon to see families that are like, we're done. We're finished. We want the charges dropped. And to clear up another myth, oftentimes you can't just drop charges. Those charges are, in Pennsylvania, it's the Commonwealth versus a defendant. Those charges belong to the state. They don't belong to the parents or the child. The state doesn't need you to move forward with charges. They can still proceed anyway. And that's something that becomes a struggle in so many cases because people get fed up. Parents are like, the system is damaging my child more than the abuse did. I hear that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I don't believe that to be true all of the time, but the system certainly doesn't always help. The end result sometimes is worth it. But
well, we could talk about the myths and misconceptions, but probably before we do that, we should talk about I know, a child in my sphere of influence has been harmed. They have, experienced and been victimized. As a supportive adult, what can I do and what should I avoid?
I think the biggest thing that the supportive parent or adult in those kids' lives, any age of child, is believe them. That's the simplest thing. No matter how crazy the story may sound, kids rarely make this up. Less than 2% of cases are a false report. And that spans any domestic violence, sexual assault. Generally speaking, 2% or fewer cases are false reports. People love to say, oh, the kid just wants attention. No, it was really hard for them to say that. So the best thing that you can do is support them and believe them. Secondly, I think is a lot of times parents aren't the best place for the child to process all that information. And it's hard for parents to understand that a lot of kids still really love their abuser. We talked about the grooming process. A bond is formed during that grooming process. That child doesn't suddenly recognize the abuse as abuse oftentimes. They recognize, you took this person away from me that always made sure that I had every new Xbox game.
So there's conflicted feelings that the victim has positive feelings toward
absolutely.
The abuser.
Especially if it's a parent. We have tons of cases where it's...
But this could be a friend or somebody in the community that the victim is now sort of saying, well, two things that it's really hard for people to talk about, but even like that we would label something like sexually abusive, there was some type of sensation, and people, victims will struggle with that.
Yeah. And depending on the age, again, I think especially in adolescence, young adolescence, there's some participation in some cases on both the victim and defendant's end of things. There's some level of participation. Sometimes there's some level of enjoyment, even if the child knows like something about this is so wrong. And then they feel horrible admitting there was some part of that physically that felt good. But again, they were groomed to believe that was normal.
Right. So this is all part of the grooming process and a relationship being formed. It's common, and to reiterate, to be supportive, we have to hear people out about the experience if they're willing to share, and believe. It's a myth that there's frequent lying going on just for attention. It's actually a very small percentage of that will happen. So it is good to support and believe the report and hear people out and act on it. I
think that's the biggest part of it is do something. The child told you because even if verbally the child was saying, well, yeah, I told you, but don't tell anybody else. I think in more times than not, they almost feel obligated to say the words, don't do anything about this, because you don't know what threat they had. I'll never love you again if you tell anybody. What if that's mom or dad, I won't love you if you tell anybody. Well, the fear of losing a parent or making that parent angry is pretty great.
Yeah. Well, you think about, what's the church's part in all of this too. So there's in families, where the person is internal to the family. And I want you to, just make this definition to the listeners that a church is a spiritual family. And so, what happens, like a pastor is aware that somebody has been accused of being a perpetrator. It's not founded or unfounded yet. That person is now in the church and involved in ministries. How do we handle something like that? Because, the pastor will say, well, I don't know what's really even been determined yet.
Right.
And a person is innocent until proven guilty. What do I do about this person until I'm sure?
Right.
But then if I don't act now and this person is a perpetrator, then 3 weeks have gone by and everybody is going to know that
I mean, first and foremost, I think is safety. And part of that is a lot of families do disclose to their pastors or priests first, or church counselor. I mean, I know there's some churches that have a broader range of services available, but any church person, like we talked about, those are mandated reporters. So
yeah, so you would think of safety, like say, for instance, and that would be sort of the rule of thumb is to say, hey, look, I'm not going to make any judgment one way or the other, but to keep things safe, while we go through this, there should be some reinforced boundaries.
Absolutely.
Or, in this setting, like say there's this ministry event, you need to voluntarily not be there.
Yeah.
Or
And
I need to involuntarily tell you
right,
shouldn't.
Exactly.
And I need you to understand that. I'm not judging you. I'm creating this safe space.
And I think that the best way to, and again, this is just my opinion, one way, maybe not the best way to handle that is churches can have a very broad definition and policies of here's what we do in the off chance this happens. We believe in the wonderfulness and goodness of our church people. But here's what happens if this occurs. I mean, I think preemptively having policies and procedures that are actually followed through on, it eliminates the element of surprise. It's no, here, and then you have it on paper. You knew when you volunteered to be part of this youth ministry that this is how we treat the situation, whether or not
it's nothing
you're
personal,
innocent or guilty. This is just the policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that goes a long way, is to have clear policies and procedures. And, in a family, clear boundaries of what is safe behavior, what is not. And, all of those things, come together in some very difficult situations. But, so let me ask some common listener questions. And I don't want to repeat anything that I've just, we've just gone through, but, let's do a lightning round if we can.
Oh, geez.
And this is Ask Christian
Have you
Counseling
noticed
Associates.
I'm not lightning around anything, but okay.
So just questions that listeners may ask. First one, my child's behavior has changed recently. They seem withdrawn and moody. How do I know if this could be a sign of abuse or just normal teenage behavior?
Ask questions.
You have to talk about it.
I think creating conversation, making all topics are okay to be put on the table, even when they're uncomfortable. And
Okay.
I mean,
You just really have to address it.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
answer questions with questions.
Next question. I teach Sunday school, or I'm a preschool teacher, or just imagine, what's the best way to set clear boundaries with kids without seeming cold or unfriendly?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one. I think kids have a natural sense of boundaries to begin with. And again, like I said, answer questions with questions. Ask the child what's comfortable. Yeah. Give a sense of ownership of children's spaces and their bodies to them, because that encourages them to use their voice later if something happens.
So say, for instance, if you wanted to give a kid a hug, you would ask him, hey, is it okay to hug you?
Perfect. Yeah.
And some kids might say, no, it's not.
And make it okay to say no as well. I mean,
Right.
one of the biggest frustrations is you have to go hug so-and-so goodbye. Like, that's a trigger for me personally.
Yeah. Okay, next one.
Yes.
If my teenager tells me a friend has been abused, what should I do?
That is so difficult. I think the best first approach is asking if it's okay with your child, because you can't damage the trust that you have with your own child. If you're a mandated reporter, you just have to report it anyway. But if you're not,
So if I heard through another person, and I'm a mandated reporter, and I don't even see this person, I don't even know what happened, but
still
this is
making
what
the
this
report.
person is telling me that they know, then I have to make that report.
yes. Any new to you information about any abuse happening to any child needs to be reported. But I think when it's our teens coming to us saying so-and-so told me at school today that they've been abused by whomever, I think, and you can be a mandated reporter and still prompt conversation, but I think including the teen that may be being abused is completely acceptable. A protective parent won't mind that you offered that support to their kid.
So you could, because like a kid comes back from Minnesota and says, I'm not trying to be like, we're all standing on the moon kind of question, but I've been involved in so many of these scenarios, like hearing these, so, one thing that you could really do is to say, hey, I'd like to get that parent on the phone. I'm going to let you know that this is going to happen. I want to tell them what you just told me and get their response, and maybe we can move forward from there. But technically, if I'm a mandated reporter, it doesn't matter if I talk to the parent or not. I need to call that in.
Even as a mandated reporter, I think it's okay to give the family a heads up. Hey, unless you think it's unsafe, obviously, but to say, your kid reported, XYZ type of abuse at the hands of someone not in your home. I'm a mandated reporter. I am going to have to report this, but I wanted to make you aware first. Because sometimes they might have great information to add to that.
And I understand that there's a range of feelings about this when you get into. There was a time things have changed in Pennsylvania, and like state to state, these standards are different. And Pennsylvania seems to me to be one of the most strict states because of what happened at Penn State. There was a reaction against that with Sandusky. That after that, and you saw like what happened to Joe Paterno, and there was people involved in that, and it was terrible tragedy in the community, and there was a lot of victims. So I don't want to belittle that, but it changed everything. That in the way that mandated reporting is being done. It's different state to state. We're talking about Pennsylvania. We're required to be trained in this. But even still, that's parents will be like, well, a mandated reporter has to make that report, and to understand that. And here, unless there's there's going to be a big explosion that happens, we coach the counselors that if that's going to happen, we're going to tell you. So you can know that.
And there's a lot of gray area with, I think all laws, but Pennsylvania does still have some gray area where it's recommended that even if something was already reported, when it's new to you, report it again, because multiple reports of the same abuse can sometimes hold a little more weight or new information to add to it. There's a lot of people that don't know that or abide by that because it is a gray area.
So that's a nice, there's a whole bunch of things around these boundaries that we have to deal with now because of how widespread this problem is. But maybe one that's not as obvious. Is it okay to let my kids have sleepovers? What precautions should I take? Because they're sleeping together, or in the same room, or now I'm worried.
I think, and there's some amazing Google sexually developmentally appropriate behaviors, and it will break it down into age groups and give parents a reasonable guideline of here's behaviors that are on course with what's normal for this age group in terms of their sexual development or curiosity about different body parts. The first time toddlers notice, hey, your parts look different than mine, there's a natural curiosity there. That doesn't make a child a predator, or doesn't mean they're being abused, all those things. But I think in terms of sleepovers, what's developmentally appropriate. Is it developmentally appropriate for 15-year-olds to be having a sleepover and all sharing the same bed and being very secretive, or worrying about the phone use is something that people bring up a lot. Teens with the phones.
So if you Google this and you sort of consider what are age appropriate boundaries, you're going to come to a place where you have to notice what is risky behavior and what is safe behavior. And you got to err on the side of safe behavior without completely suffocating the fun out of everything.
Right.
And,
it's a fine line. And it also depends on the parent's personal experience. I mean, some parents are just not comfortable with having their kids sleep outside of their home for any number of reasons, and that's going to have to be okay. And that's the rules that you set in your household. Kids can still have fun and not be at sleepovers.
Right. Right. Well, hey, final question. So, how can I support an adult friend who tells me that they were abused as a child?
The number of adult survivors is astounding. I think first things first, don't get into water so deep that you can't help them. I think there's things that are best left to trauma-focused counselors or therapists, but also supporting people that disclose that to us. There's also a statute of limitations that if that person is under 50 years old in the state of Pennsylvania, typically they can still report, even if it's just to make them feel a sense of closure. Again, I'll say ask questions. People tell you things because they want to talk about it. Silver lining is not very effective. Well, at least you got through it, and now you're 50 and you have your own fantastic children. No.
No platitudes.
Yes.
No, the person doesn't necessarily, or they don't need advice.
Yeah.
We have a saying here. It's like a slogan here at CCA. It's always be counseling, and that is ABC. That when you're dealing with anything, and if you just watch this podcast today or listen to it, you're starting to get your mind and your heart around a very sensitive topic, but we need to be sensitive to very important things in our lives. So these boundaries, and when they are wrongly crossed, is very important for us to be sensitive to. And then how to counsel or how to minister or just how to connect with somebody with empathy and care for them. And that was always one of my biggest upsets about the training in the counseling program. Had so many things in it, but it really didn't delve hard enough into how do we assist this person in helping them put their lives back together, even before they knew that that's what they had to do. Right. And sometimes that's a lifetime journey, but we need to be able to get into that space and of empathy and listening and demonstrating care in an appropriate way. And it's sort of different for everybody. And that's why we say everybody needs to be a counselor in that sense, where we just don't run over that or ignore it. And, as we learned today, there's a lot of people out there who, need someone to stand with them like that and, help them rebuild trust and get a sense of how they're going to face their life now moving forward. So, Nicole, it is great to have you, answer some of our questions and, tell us about a very important topic of how to handle sexual abuse and reporting. And if it'd be okay, would you say a prayer for the folks, especially maybe somebody out there who's struggling with that? We hope that we can connect with you and that if we could be of further help, that you would come see us.
I'd love to. Thank you. Lord Jesus, please be with every victim of abuse and childhood sexual assault today. Watch over them, give them a voice, and please, all of us that love someone who is a victim, please give us the grace and the strength and the wisdom to help them and be a voice for them and to advocate for them effectively. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, Nicole Coleman-Hammett, thank you so much for being with us today. Folks, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.